Thanks everybody for coming in today in relation to this ongoing debate in their committee. Just to Professor O'Neill, Professor O'Neill, I think some of the language that you use in your statement is very regretful. Very regretful in relation to the word killing, eugenics. You know, this is kind of kind of going down the road that I don't think we should go down. But look, I can't stop, people that come into this committee or outside the committee using terminology that is offensive to those that are trying to have a reasonable debate about assisted dying. In relation to, is there any jurisdiction that you know of that assisted dying is compulsory?
Not so much compulsory, but what you find is that people get dragged into it or pulled into it. Atul Gawande has written a very interesting editorial about doctors that get involved with the death penalty. They're living in a small town where there's I'm answering your question to the chair. Sorry, Chair. Can I answer the question?
Chair. No, that, but just leave him answer it whatever way he likes, and then you can come back if you have another question or query on his answer.
What we see is what we call normative conformity, where we begin to see standards slip around providing adequate and appropriate care. Again, you heard some of this from New Zealand yesterday. And what happens is people feel, well, it's there and somebody should be doing it. And I think what happens is then we see slippage in terms of providing appropriate care. And in terms of the language I use, I suppose they are the language that are used in the ethics literature. And I think what we need to bring to this arena is an informed debate where we use the language that is common and procedurally used. And I think when we hear words that the language is offensive, certainly in debating in other circles, we're concerned that people are trying to stifle what is the actual language of ethics journals, ethics research, and positioning as it is. And if the Lancet talks about preventing, a Lancet which is a broad-based general journal, one of the top journals in the world, talks about preventing healers from becoming killers, I think that is what it is, Deputy Kenny.
As I said, it's regrettable that you're using that kind of language, because we had a specialist last week from Australia, and he was a palliative care specialist, and he says that those that avail of assisted dying in Australia, in his state, that they find it extremely offensive in relation to conflating the issue of assisted dying and suicide. Extremely offensive. So I'll leave it there. Dr. Hartney, I think your opening statement is very, very good in relation to the overall basis of assisted dying legislation. And obviously it's up to this committee to recommend or not recommend assisted dying. Hopefully it does. I think, the majority of the population of Ireland support legislative change, and that's been borne out by numerous polls. And I think the assisted dying legislation is only as good as the legislation, and it has to be extremely robust. I mean, we had specialists from New Zealand and Australia, and their legislation is very young in relation to assisted dying. It's very limited, but extremely robust for those that can avail of assisted dying. So, for example, in New Zealand, somebody on the grounds of disability could never avail of assisted dying. Somebody of advanced age could never avail of assisted dying, and somebody on the grounds of mental health could never avail of assisted dying. I genuinely agree with them parameters, but obviously other jurisdictions have a bit more of a liberal approach in relation to them. So we have to look at the Irish context in relation to assisted dying. So would you agree, if legislation is legislated for, and we are the legislators at the end of the day, that it has to be extremely robust, and to a certain degree, those that can avail of assisted dying, it's a cohort of people. Obviously, as I said, other jurisdictions are more broader. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but it has to be robust and be very kind of identifiable to those that can avail of assisted dying. Would you agree that the legislation, that legislators such as us have to put that in place in relation to those that can't avail of assisted dying?
Well, Thank you very much, Deputy. I agree the legislation would need to be robust and there would need to be robust safeguards. I suppose where I feel it's a little more nuanced is that an entire cohort might be excluded because, you know, just on the grounds of a disability or age. I suppose the capacity question that Dr. McDonough so ably demonstrated could mean that somebody with a disability could have a terminal illness and therefore wish to avail of assisted dying, and therefore just because they have a disability does not mean shouldn't mean that they would be excluded from that option. So I think the safeguards or where the legislation should be putting up guardrails is that the reasons for wishing for assisted dying can be, I suppose, tangible or demonstrable, and so kept in the medical arena like a terminal illness, which is what I think most of these jurisdictions are about, rather than some of those societal barriers where somebody feels life is not worth living because they haven't access to the services or supports they need. So I think that's where the legislation would need to be careful, rather than I suppose, and as I say, that kind of question presupposes that it would be introduced, and the NDA isn't coming down on a position on that in our input to this committee. What we can only offer is the research on the barriers that apply at the moment and how they might be perceived by people to be reasons for opting for assisted dying.
And we've all kind of recognised the deficiencies in relation to, in some areas of palliative care, in relation to general care, and we should never have a circumstances where somebody, you know, will want to avail of assisted dying because they can't get that care. That can never happen. But even in society where all them provisions can be put in place, all them provisions, somebody that's coming to the end of life should have. It's a fundamental right that they should have a say in how they die. To me, that's the fundamental question of assisted dying, you know, because it's their life at the end of the day. It's not this paternalistic kind of approach that we've had in the past that has failed. I think we have to have a rights-based approach and a patient-based approach to actually those that can avail of assisted dying, because any society or a kind of hierarchy that says, well, you can't, you have to suffer. What kind of society are we living in, you know? And I know Professor Neil doesn't agree with that, but that's you know, that's the way, that's the parameters that we have to look at.
We'll come back to that. Thank you.